now joined by the head of office at the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Jensen. Thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You know, Trond, year after year, we see plans, we see pledges, we see projections. What makes the 2025 Lean Season Plan any different? Millions are at risk of food insecurity, but is this just another temporary fix? And how serious is this crisis?
So it's a very, very dramatic situation, as I think was said in your little piece there. What is different from last year? First of all, the number of severely acutely malnourished children has doubled. At the same time, our ability to prevent malnutrition as well as treating malnutrition has more than halved. So we are looking at a very, very rapidly escalating situation. And as one of the speakers on today's event said from Médecins Sans Frontières, last year was already a difficult year where they had 2 children sleeping in one cot, they had used the floor in the facilities, etc. So it's a very, very difficult situation. Of course, this is something that shouldn't happen because it's easily preventable. But it's difficult in a conflict situation where many of the people who live off farming are unable to go out farming because of insecurity, because they are displaced and they're residing in the garrison towns. With increasing food prices that we have seen the last couple of years, it's also difficult then for people to procure food. So the challenge that we have right now is that some of our biggest donors have frozen their assistance. And that accounted for 60% of the funding last year. Right. And other donors are following suit. So as the resident coordinator, humanitarian coordinator said, solidarity is in short supply. So that makes the situation very, very dramatic. And as was said, hundreds of thousands of children's lives are at risk.
Yes, indeed. And these children and the malnourished can't wait. I mean, only heavens can wait, like they say. So now, what strategy do you have in place to close, this funding gap, with the freezing of funds from donors and what have you? What are the strategies in place to not just, close the funding gaps on a temporary basis, but what are the more sustainable, long-term measures to ensure that we're not, back here again, from year to year?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the most important thing is that we try to resolve this crisis now. So we urgently need money for that, so that we can save lives and alleviate suffering here and now. And so the plan is the priorities within the priorities within the priorities. This is what is urgently needed in terms of saving lives. And of course we are hoping that the government, the private sector, as well as member states and other donors will provide the 159 million that is needed in terms of what is needed today, not tomorrow, next week or next month, because otherwise children will die. When it comes to the longer term, I think there are a number of things which are happening. The government is investing in food systems, in employment. Of course, we are hoping that the conflict in the northeast will come to an end, because it's difficult to find solutions when there's still insecurity. And so there's a number of things that needs to be resolved. One, resources, but the second thing is security for the people so that they can go back to their normal lives. And they can restore the dignity and their livelihoods.
Where do you plan to direct this $159.3 million that's required for the next 6 months? I mean, is it just for feeding, or, what's the scope?
Yeah, so it's an integrated plan. When a child is malnourished, it has a number of needs. So the first thing is that it needs nutritional support. If it gets early nutritional support, we can prevent it from becoming acutely or severely acutely malnourished, which is a life-threatening situation. What happens when children become severely acutely malnourished? It means that even if they get the smallest infection, they get measles, they get acute watery diarrhea, malaria, that can kill them. So then they need urgent medical assistance. So what we're hoping to do is to provide water hygiene and sanitation support so that there is access to clean water. We want to make sure that there is health support because they need medication, they need treatment, but also then nutritional support as well as protection support. Because one of the things that we often see when food is in short supply, and it is a drastic situation, very dramatic, is that women and girls are amongst the most vulnerable. And very often they adopt what we call negative coping mechanisms. So that's, you know, they
exacerbating the issues on ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Tred, I need to ask you because, I mean, the elephant in the room, one of the reasons why the US has decided to freeze funds globally, it has raised the question about accountability and transparency. So yes, on the one hand, there is issue with funding. You wonder if the world is still listening. But then on the other hand, you have to ask those questions. Can you guarantee the transparency and the accountability of these funds when they are being raised to solve these issues?
Absolutely. We have systems and structures in place, as does all our partners, to make sure that the money goes to the right people and does the right thing. And you know, I think the institution that you're referring to has been delivering humanitarian assistance since the 1960s.
USA.
Yes.
And saved tens of millions of lives. And of course, in a conflict or a crisis situation, accounting for every single naira might be difficult, but I'm convinced that we have adequate systems which makes sure that we are transparent. We are accountable, but we're also efficient when it comes to delivering. And that's something that we work on every day to make sure that we are accountable. But our accountability, first and foremost, are to the people affected, that they get what they need at the right time and what they're actually needing and wanting.
Yeah, but with the freezing of funds, does it call for greater accountability to ensure that, you know, when questions are raised about whether these funds are actually directed in the right, you know, places, that you have, you know, the answers? Yeah.
Without getting into a political discussion that relates to the country that we are referring to, there are the systems. Not to mention, there are accounting officers in all our donor countries, which scrutinizes every single penny or every single cent which is being provided. Yes, there have been issues in terms of diversion of assistance in the past, but there are very few examples of this, and every time this has happened, we've learnt the lesson and we've improved our systems.
Great. I just want to ask you, I know you've talked about what needs to be done, fixing security. I mean, we allow the people go back to their farms and then that fixes, it's like a circle. But I wanted to ask you about other issues such as climate change. How much of a role is that playing? And then are there interventions in that regard? Also, I'm sorry, this is more than one question at a time, but if you were to advise the Nigerian government, what are the low-hanging fruits? Do you think they are looking inwards enough to fix the crisis of food security or insecurity?
I mean, that's a question I'm not very well placed to answer.
I know.
But I can tell you that we are working extremely closely with the government, both at the state level but also at the federal level. And one of the things that we are looking at, what we always try to do is to improve the efficiency of what we do. And we have an initiative that we are supporting with the government, with NEMA, with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and with the Vice President's Office, which aims at something we call anticipatory action. And that means acting before disaster strikes, so that we can help people to stay safe when you have flooding, when you have disease outbreaks, etc., because that saves money. Most importantly, it saves lives.
Prevention is better than cure and cheaper.
Absolutely.
Like they say, Trond Jensen, Head of Office, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us, and keep up the good work.
Thank you
so much.